Hello, everyone. We are here on the Black Podcast. And again, every Thursday, I'm so excited about the guests and the people that we make these connections with. I want to make sure that we maximize all our time with our guests, but I want to give you just a little snippet of why we started the Black Podcast. Brian and I have created a program where it helps to change the narrative of our young Black males. And so we use the Black Podcast to make sure that we give our students relevant connections and network with our guests that you see here on the show. My background has been I've been in education for 16 years, as well as athletics, athletic leadership. And so I knew that there was issues and challenges that our young Black men faced on a daily basis. And so I studied how athletics affects their educational plans, whether it's through the leaderships of their coaches or their teachers or who they're surrounded with. And so I combined what I do with my partner here, Brian Streak, who had a background in social work. And we like to make sure that we address issues that a lot of times we hide in our community, or within the education system we try to stay away from those topics, as far as self-identity and setting boundaries and relationships. Those are the things that our students need. And so with our company HSBA, we decided to create that space for our young men and women, but to really change the narrative of our young Black males. So that's kind of a background of why we started the Black Podcast. It wasn't just to have a show, it's for our community. So you can always do your part as well, and support us by sharing these videos, sharing the content, making sure that you are telling people about the things that we're doing within the Black Podcast and the type of connections we've made, because you never know who's in your circle, or who you're surrounded with that need to hear these necessary stories. Everyone's story here has been so different, but one thing that we can truly say is that it has been a big inspiration to us, and given a lot of our audience hope on understanding the journey of our guests. And then that gives you the bigger picture of why we are so passionate about being productive in our Black community. So we want to thank you for supporting us every Thursday. We had a year anniversary, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. And so it's just been a blessing. Every Thursday, we've been having guest after guest after guest, and it just gets better and better. So I'm just so glad and grateful for our next guest that we do have today's show. My partner over
Yes,
here.
indeed. Yeah, it's been one of those days for me. One of those crazy days where it seems like everything is hitting the wall at the same time. But we're here, and like she said, she's excited for the guest that we have today. Just listening to some of the dialogue that he was sharing with us prior to getting on, it just makes me encouraged, and the things that we're doing, because it shows that there are so many individuals around us that see the value in what it is we have going on, that actually have connections that we're connected to. So ultimately, us being able to align with these individuals, plus us being able to put these individuals in front of you, just reinforces the work that we're doing. So off of that note, my name is Brian Street. I started a company about 3 years and some change ago called Your Legacy Begins Now, where I focus on helping people understand that regardless of the situations, circumstances, so on and so forth that you went through, regardless of what your last name is known for in the past, you can start today to surround yourself with individuals like Dr. Sherelle Hobson, like our guest, like myself, and putting the right information into your mind so that you can start living your purpose, your life of purpose, because your legacy begins now. So working in Miami, I started to see a lot of teenagers aging out of the foster care system, not really having the life skills necessary to transition into adulthood and prosper, continue to fall through the cracks. Some of them had their life taken. Some of them ended up in prison. Some of them ended up having children that came into the foster care system. And I didn't see anything being done about that. I went to administration and excuses were given. In my mind, excuses were given. There's no funding for it. I came back to Mississippi to work on my master's degree, where I got active immediately, becoming a speaker in a local juvenile detention center, becoming a speaker at so many local high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, community colleges, and just speaking all across the area, pouring into that next generation, showing them that there are so many more potentials out there. And it's brought me to where I am today. It's brought me to meet this young lady before you that has a similar vision. Our visions are such in alignment that it only made sense that we work together. There are certain pieces of the puzzle that I was building that she actually was a perfect fit for. Certain pieces of the puzzle she was building that I was a good fit for. And ultimately, the guest that we bring before you today is an additional compartment of that puzzle to help us on the mission that we're on. So, without further ado, we bring to you today Dr. Calvin Rice. How's it going?
How is it going? How's it
Wonderfully.
We're
good?
just glad to have you, and thank you for taking the time to being on the Black Podcast. We know that your schedule is very busy because you are an important man in your community, and so I'm just excited to have you and share you with our audience and our guests because, as you know, working in the educational system, there are some things that or some challenges that we see occur on a daily basis that we don't get to talk about as much when we're actually in that system. And so I truly appreciate you taking the time and just speaking on your experience and your journey and enlighten us on all the knowledge that you have with that doctorate degree that you have there. So congratulations on that, because it's definitely something that our young Black males and females need to see more of. That we're able to be more than we can imagine and do more. So I thank you for being a part of the podcast and sharing that with us. We want to start off with talking about a background. I believe that behind every glory is a story. And so we don't get to share our story as much as we should, either because we grew up, you don't tell people your business, or we just let people see what they want to see and create their own story. But we want to know more about your background. We want to know the dynamics of your family, where you grew up at, and then we're going to make our way to what you're doing right now and why you're doing it.
Okay, okay. Interestingly, I listened to the young man share about, uh, and the gist of it was you have to change your narrative pretty much. And you're asking me about my background, and when I share my background information with you, you'll see that the narrative was changed because I started out. I'm actually from Hampton, Virginia. Uh, I moved to Houston when I was around 7 years old. Um, Went to school in the HISD school district, but I started off. The story goes. You see my glory, but you don't know my story. Um, from first to eighth grade, I was in special ed. Uh, couldn't read. Uh, Started really reading around the eighth grade. Uh, you talked about relationships. There was so many people that made a difference in where I am today, and it started with a young lady by the name of Wilma Smith, who was a counselor in the Houston Independent School District at Sharpstown Middle School. I was actually serving time in what you would call the Student Resource Center, which most people call it the ABU unit. And so one day I had an episode, and she served as the counselor for that program, or she was a counselor on the campus. I'm not sure if she was specifically for that program, but I had a meltdown, and she came into the SRC to get me out. Mr. Hooker uh, was the teacher in the classroom, and she came and got me and said, let me have him. And she sat me down, and she was having a conversation with me and asking me a series of questions. And while she was asking me questions, she uh, was drawing a picture of me. And so while she was drawing a picture of me, uh, she asked these questions, about my family, of things I liked, things I didn't like. And at the conclusion of it, she showed me the picture, but of course I was angry. So she showed me a picture of what I looked like being angry. And she said, that's not a good look. And so she started spending time with me. So maybe a week later, she drew a picture of me while I was sitting in the office of me, with a happy face on. And she said, look at the contrast. She said, you look so much better in the happy state than when you're angry. And she started working with me. But in the midst of our interaction, she started working with me and helping me read. So over time, I began to read better, and she would give me a word every day. She would give me a new word every day, and the words got progressively harder till we got to the SAT words. So I acquired an affinity for learning new words. So even today, I like learning new words, and so you know, that's kind of the foundation for me as I begin to change the narrative. And there's some other things that I can share with you. I do have some brothers and sisters. Uh, I'm going to allow you to answer some questions, ask some questions, and then I'll go into some other things that kind of shed some light on my narrative. So,
Well, I mean, I think that that's important, and I thank you for sharing that story with us. And sometimes there is what you see a lot in the educational system is what I've seen. When there are struggles with, especially in particular young black males, they maybe learn a little bit slower. And so people would automatically put them over there because they didn't want to take the time to teach them. So it was okay, he has a problem with reading, or they would stick athletes there because then we know that if they're there, then they'll pass and we don't have to worry about, teaching them nothing and they get to walk around and just, do sports and be dumb. And so, um, so I'm so glad that you shared that story about, not being able to read or having that true struggle because some students may not really have that struggle. I always give an example of a student that was placed in a special ed and he used to be late every day. So the teacher used to say he's late here every day. But what he was doing was always waiting for everyone to get to their class before he would go to the special ed class because he felt embarrassed. And so I'm glad that you shared that story. Can you tell us more about how you felt? Did you know at that time, like, hey, I'm in special education? Did you know that you were being separated? And what was that experience like for you? Because I know that our kids
well,
will make
yeah.
fun of people.
Yeah. Well, for me in this situation, I was angry and really, when you're growing up, you don't know what your anger is about. But I was angry. I tore up classrooms, broke a kid's arm in like the second or third grade. Went to go see a psychiatrist for a whole year. Was expelled from school. So all those things uh, took place, but Baruti Kafele, who is a renowned principal, talked about closing the gaps, and he says in order for us to close the gap, the learning gap, we have to close the relationship gap. And I really believe that had the relationships that I encountered had not been formed, I would not be the individual that I am today. And so when you speak here about the special ed, everybody who's in special ed, I know and believe from my experience, is going to be embarrassed because you're separated from the norm. It's a little bit different today because you have inclusion, and so it's hard to really tell unless you're truly defined in a self-contained environment like an ABU or a AFL class. However, it is a uncomfortable situation to be in. And believe it or not, you talked about how they just put kids in classes and for various reasons, but the kids don't belong there. But the longer the kid is there, then the Pygmalion effect comes into play. The more that you say I am, then I become
Oh
what
yeah,
you
I
say I
become
am.
right.
And that kind of was the picture for me because nobody ever stopped early on to say, hey, what's really going on? Um, what's really the issue, and dig deep down and find out what was going on. And so it wasn't until I encountered Mr. Hooker, who actually was instrumental in that uh the beginning of the change, and then of course Wilma Smith, who helped me believe that I could be successful. And I remember she had me tested and with a IQ test, and when she got the things back, she was like, "Oh my God!" She made me feel like I was Einstein. And so those are the kind of things that she did to make me comfortable and make me say, you know what? Well, maybe, hey, maybe there's something here, And so I say all the time, and me myself interacting as an educator for the last 28 years, I think relationships is the most important thing that we can do as educators, is build those with our students. Um, and I give this example when I'm sharing with people that when you think about relationships and you think about coaches, and so I share this, when I'm talking to my teachers about, hey, listen, if you want to get through that kid, form a relationship with them. And a relationship doesn't mean that you have to be their friend. And I give the example, like I shop at Dillard's. That's like one of my favorite places. So when I go into Dillard's, there's a lady in there who's been in there for years. And when I go in there, she waves at me and she says, over here. Okay, because she knows what I want. We have a relationship. We have a salesperson, a buyer relationship. And so while we have a relationship, we're not friends. I don't even know her name. She doesn't know my name. I don't know where she lives, but we have a relationship with each other. And the relationship exists because we have something to give and take from each other. And that's the kind of thing that we have to do with our students. We have to understand, first of all, they have a need that we have to satisfy. And so, how do I satisfy that need? There's going to be some obstacles that's going to come in the way that can prevent me from tending to those needs. But I have to be smart enough to say, hey, listen, I know I have to start with a relationship, and then if I start with that relationship, then I can build and hopefully tear down that barrier or that wall that's going to make that child accessible to me, where I can give them what they need. So
Absolutely.
I really think that relationships are very, very important. And I went back to the whole coaching piece because as coaches, we do that as coaches. If you've ever been a coach, you know,
Good
good
coaches
coaches,
do that.
good coaches do that.
All
But
coaches don't do that, but good coaches do
good
that.
coaches do that. We start off, and the good coaches, because they not only can control their athletes, they can control any kid in the school, because they understand how to establish relationships with the kids. And it doesn't always have to be, I'm barking at you, because I don't bark. In my mind, I tell, don't scream at my kids. So don't bark. I never was a barker as a coach, but I still want to make sure that I'm attending to that kid's needs. And as a coach, we do those things. We ask questions about their family. We spend time with them. We get to know them, because we once we get to know them, then we can teach them. For me, it was the game of basketball. I can teach you the game of basketball because now you trust me. And it's the same thing with teaching. Once I build this relationship and you trust me, then you're going to trust me to give you what you need in order for you to be successful. So
Absolutely,
I
absolutely. I think that
know I
sometimes
kind of
people
went
forget
on a
about,
spin, but
that's okay. People, I think tend to forget about the importance of relationships. They get so caught up on um, knowing a lot of people, or doing a lot of this or doing a lot. It's like, you really, who do you already have that you can build something solid with. And I've always was that type of coach. I remember when I got my first head coaching job in El Paso, I used to always write a word on the board with my girls. And the girls, of course, they come in like, oh God, here go coach preaching again. But I knew that, hey, I have to teach them. I have to be the change. So I would sit there and I'll write that word on there and we'll talk about it. And then, coach, are we gonna go out to practice when we're finished talking? You know, and so I would always reiterate the importance of communicating and life and changes and what it means to be a woman and be an athlete, and having that balance of knowing when to turn on and off of being an athlete, and when you should always have your hair combed and your nails done, and that you're a girl first and an athlete second, teaching those important things. And I remember I had this coach that she just kept complaining about, the conversations, and why can't she just coach track and blah blah blah. And so I had a really supportive principal at that time, and so they had to bring me all into the boardroom, and I was sitting there as a young head coach, and had all the board and the principals and everybody sitting there, and I just told them, I spoke my truth. I said, my responsibility to these kids is to teach them about life first, track second. And they let me be because I won back to back to back championships, back to back to back. It probably wasn't because I mean, I'm a good coach, but it was because I had a relationship with my girls. If their parents was looking for them, they called me because I knew who they hung out with. I knew where they hung out at. I knew what they were doing in their class. Sometimes I would be in their class before they got there, so I was always involved in their life. And so that's how I built successful programs. And so I continue to do those type of things. When I started to become a leader, I built relationships with my coaches. Now that I'm in a leadership role now, coming from the outside, as we spoke before, coming from the outside to a place where everyone's a community, you have to kind of sell yourself to them. But what I noticed was that a lot of times when you hire within a small community, you're just cycling the same challenges, cycling the same conversations, cycling the same kind of ideas. So when I got to this new place I'm at now, everybody kind of sat back and I said, I want to get to know, how can I make your program better? How can I support you to make your program better? It's not about me. I can coach track and make a great program, but I like to see everyone win and provide those resources. So when you talked about the importance of relationships, I think teachers really miss that part because we're so thinking about time, right? I don't have time to get to know this kid. I don't have time to talk about what he got going on. But I have a current student right now who was an alternative. He's constantly in behavior issues and stuff. And so I'm teaching what they call edgenuity. And so kids who, credit short, 2, 3, 4 credits short. Um, and a lot of it's just been choices. So the first activity that I did when they came in, I said, I want you to write your name on the paper. I want you to tell me your goal for this year. And I want you to put down one word you want the world to remember you by. And they were just like, okay. But they never had anybody do that. It's always been, if you do it, great. If you don't do it, then you just be here again doing it in. But I told them, as long as you're in my presence, you're going to be successful. So checking on them, how you feeling, how you doing, have a good day, make good choices, building those relationships. People can't even, my admin is thinking, what is she doing over there? We have never got these kids to do any work. But again, building a relationship, taking those extra 5 or 10 minutes to say, how are you feeling? How's everything going? What are you thinking about? Do you need to stand up and take a break? Doing those little things take it a long way. So I really appreciate you talking about how important relationships were for you in your advancement in your education. So I
It,
thank you for that.
interestingly enough, you talk about edgenuity. The school that I'm at currently as the principal is an alternative campus. So we are a credit recovery campus. And so, of course, like you talked about, most of the kids who matriculate to campus are those students who have had difficulties. And one of the things that I always share with my teachers whenever I get an opportunity is, we have to change. You have to change the narrative for them. Um, I the when the kids and it's I try to be careful the way I phrase this, but kids who live in the inner city, what they see on a day to day basis is their norm, and so when they come to school, they're going to respond based on how they spend the majority of their time and what they see. And so if when they come here, we have to be considerate of that. And so in our actions, in our dealings, uh, we have to change the story. We have to give them something and give them experiences that they've never seen before. And one of the experiences that we have to give them is, um, a soft tone turns away wrath. And sometimes teachers want to raise their voice at the kids, but guess what? That
They
doesn't
already
phase
used to
because
that.
they're used to that.
Hmm.
And so how do you expect them to respond a different way if you don't show them how to respond a different way? If you're doing what they're doing, then what you're saying is what they do is okay because that's what they see all the time. They don't know anything different. And so in order for you to change that behavior, you have to give them something different to work with. And so experiences, relationships and experiences is the next thing. You have to give them experiences that are different from what they experience. And I'm gonna give you an example. When I was a head basketball coach at Central, um, previous to me coming to Central, I worked at Westbrook, which is a school across town, as the varsity assistant. And so every 3 years, they would go to Canada to play in this tournament. And of course, they would have to raise a whole lot of money to go. And so when I came to Central, uh, I was like, we're gonna go to Canada. So everybody was like, man, you gonna raise all that money, man? They don't need to go to Canada and da da da. And I'm like, do you realize that the majority of our kids have never been out of their neighborhood? They don't know anything else. And the culture and the realities that they see every day, they don't know that there's something different. And so we ended up going to Canada. And I promise you, the kids to this day, when I see my ex-players, they still talk about, man, coach, man, we appreciate that, because we were up there for about 7 days. We flew. Sometime it was the first time the kids had ever flown, but you have to give different experiences in order for the kids to know. And probably with the exception of maybe 2 kids that I can recall off of that team, with the exception of 2 of them, all of them went to school. They didn't go to school to play basketball, but they went to college, they graduated, or they went and got a skill and they're working, some of them making more money than I make. And I think it's because one of the things that you talked about, having those conversations with them, and they would always, because I would always throw those, I told you I'm a wordsmith, so I would throw those big words at them, and they would always be like, "Oh, coach, there you go with those, big words." So now when they see me, they remember those words, so they throw them back at me. And so again, experiences, creating experiences, and just giving them something different than what they see on a day-to-day basis makes a difference in how successful you can help them become.
Now, I'm so glad that you mentioned, towards the beginning of that piece, of the fact that they deal with things in their community that dictate their behavior when they come into the classroom. I went to my alma mater, where I went to high school. I went there to pretty much to do a needs assessment. I wanted to do a needs assessment to potentially put together a mentoring program. And I was speaking with the assistant principal, which was also the behavioral specialist. So he took care of behavioral issues. And I was saying how it's so important to look at the majority of these kids that are coming from the inner city. And there's a specific community that's very well known to produce some of the most misbehaved children, because it's the environment that they're in. So I told this principal, this assistant principal, we have to look at their behaviors through a trauma-focused lens. And he looked at me like I was speaking Spanish, like I was speaking Chinese, Mandarin. He had no idea what I was speaking about. And I broke it down like, look, these kids, when they go home, like, it's chaos. A lot of them, they don't have order at home. They take care of things themselves. They go in, their parents may have something for them to eat, may not. They come back home when they want to. And there's just so much chaos. There's things that they're seeing. There's drug related, there's violence. They see that becomes their personality, that, develops their personality. So when they come into the classroom, they're going to react to whatever's happening around them the way they would react at home. But you're disciplining them only based off of that reaction. You're not looking at the root of it. So you send them off to alternative school. They feel like nobody cares. When they're sitting in alternative school, they're getting further and further behind. You try to put them back into the normal classes. They're so far behind that they don't even see the purpose anymore. And that's how that cycle begins. And it's what I love working with and hearing individuals like yourself speak, because you understand that because he's doing what he's doing right now, I don't need to jump all over him. I need to have a conversation with him. I need to ask questions. And when you ask the right questions, you can get them to open up, and you know exactly what resources and what tools you need to pull out to effectively help change what they're going through. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and I hope there's administrators out there that have a difficulty with this area. Please reach out to us. And actually, myself and Dr. Hobson are planning a webinar next month where we're going to pretty much do a presentation in that space, like learning to lead through the lenses of the students. So I'm just glad that you mentioned that, because it's so needed in our community, in our schools, that perspective.
One of the things that I had a thought, and I'm getting old, but I wanted to talk about the as when I'm dealing with students, there has to be accountability has its place. So I have to hold students accountable, but I can't vacillate. I have to be consistent. And so a lot of times misbehaviors persist on large scales because there's no systems that are implemented with fidelity to hold the student, to boundaries consistently. And so when it's almost like, and we as adults, if we don't know what's going on, then we're going to operate under our own recognizance. And so it's the same thing for a student. If you're not giving clear, concise expectations for students, or for my teachers for that matter, they're gonna operate on their own. And so how can I, in the position that I'm in, see a kid operate and I haven't given them clear expectations? Now, once I give the clear expectations and I'm consistent, when I go to the student and he's done something wrong, then I can have a conversation with him. I can ask him questions and get the student to see that he's wrong. I'm gonna give you an example today. Of course, I can't remember what happened in the classroom. I think the kid was on his cell phone or something out in the classroom. And of course, we have devices, so kids don't have to use their cell phones. And so when the teacher had shared something with him, and so when I passed by, I was doing my walkthrough. So the kid, I told the kid, I said, "Hey, you're not supposed to have your cell phone out." So he made a comment that, "Well, we always wrong." So teachable moment, I went to him and I said, "Well, let me ask you, no, this is what it was. I'm sorry, it was a cell phone." The student was in using Edgenuity. So on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, the students, they work in Edgenuity. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, it's a direct teach. And so the kid was actually working in a program that he wasn't supposed to be working in. And so the teacher had redirected him, and he was like, "Well, why I can't do work for my other classes?" And so I said, "You can." I said, "You need to do the work for this class." So one of the other kids said something to him. And he was like, "We always going to be wrong here." And I said, I would walk back over to him. And I say, "Well, let me ask you this question." I said, "What class are you in?" He said, "Social studies." I said, "What class were you doing work in?" He said, "Math or something." And I say, "So you in a math, social studies class doing math. Who's wrong? And is it about wrong? Is it about me being wrong or saying that you're wrong? Or is it about you being wrong?" So he just looked at me. He couldn't answer because he knew that he was wrong. And so again, making them take ownership of what they do wrong, what they know. When you've clearly defined things and you've built relationships and you're consistent, they know. And you can interact with them and get them to do what you need them to do without incident because they know. So
And so many will discipline or punish and don't really have that conversation afterwards. And I'm a certified foster parent trainer in the state of Florida. And in our trainings, we would always tell our foster parents, like, regardless of what the discipline is, have a conversation with them afterwards. Let them know what they did wrong so that they can correct the action moving forward. But in so many schools, it just goes right back to what I was mentioning earlier. They see what happened. You're in trouble. You know what you did. You know what you did, instead of talking them through it and giving them corrective actions. How about next time you try this approach? How about next time you try this approach? No, I'm just going to throw you out the system, and you better figure it out before you come back.
the purpose of us interacting with a student once they've done something is to make an attempt to extinguish the behaviors. And so it's almost like, and of course, you all are familiar with the school to prison pipeline, and it really does in essence set our kids up for that, because nothing that we're doing in the school rehabilitates them. Nothing in the prison system rehabilitates them. Normally, they go to prison, they come out, and they do the same thing, because our actions and our methodology is not working. And so, and I have a great friend who really kind of like you all clicked with each other. Her name is Dr. Belinda George, and if you ever get a chance, look her up, because she's fantastic with kids. But we would talk all the time, and she is really, 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 really good at the whole building relationship thing and understanding every dynamic with a kid. I call her all the time and say, "Hey, what are you doing? With your kids?" And so she put me on a Zoom where they do this thing on Friday. Um, uh, they dance on Friday. She's an elementary school principal, but they dance on Fridays. So they have a morning meeting and they do it on Zoom. And so everybody in the classroom, they do a Zoom, they do their announcements and everything on Zoom. But they have this activity where the kids are doing everything. And so I'm in essence, she's teaching them how things should be done, and she's giving them an opportunity to participate instead of the adults driving everything. They're giving it to them. And so one of the things that she does is almost like, um, we do all of these fun things. So your punishment when you don't do something right is we're gonna take that great thing from you. You understand what I'm saying? And then when I take that from you, now I'm having a conversation with you about why I took it from you. The other thing, I don't know if you all, I'm sure you all familiar with Harry Wong and Mary Wong, uh, procedures and routines. The first 10 days of school, y'all familiar with that? Um, One of the things that Dr. Wong talks about is that when a kid enters into my room or a kid enters into my school building, I should be teaching procedures and routines and should be doing it with fidelity. And when I give a consequence for the the behavior that was unacceptable, but I do not make the student do it over or make them aware of what they did, then the kid feels like that they got away with something. So they're gonna do it again. And so while we do things to where we're punitive, so a kid does something and you got to go to ISS, but there's nothing attached to it. Um, our We have a school that's called Pathways, and so our kids, when they get in trouble at the main campus, fights or drugs or what have you, then they go to the alternative campus, which is a discipline campus, much different from mine. So when those kids go to the campus, they're there and they persist there, but there's nothing going on there to rehabilitate whatever it is that they did, whether it was fighting or drugs. And so we have a system where we're being punitive, but there's no rehabilitation in the process. Restorative practices is a great model. I think that it's a great model. I think there has to be a better understanding of how to implement it, because I think a lot of people don't know really how to implement it, and it has to be structured in order for it to be effective. You can't take bits and pieces of it and try to implement it and say, "Oh, I'm doing restorative practices." There has to be there's different components to it, and all of them have to be together in order for it to work. But yeah, we have to discipline with dignity.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned before, even with the students that I have now, um, I've been trying to build on I'm the head track coach, so I was building on that. And one thing these girls were used to was people not dealing with them. So they knew if I get an attitude, then that person's probably gonna be like, you know what, forget it, I ain't gonna deal with this. And so they want you to do that, right? And so one of them told me, you every day you keep coming here asking me, to join track, or you keep asking me, why? Like, I don't want to do it, or I don't want to. And so it was like they've never experienced what success feels like.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about the big picture of what sports offer you, or even giving these kids something to do, like you said, some of these kids never left out of town. So get an opportunity to say, hey, you get to get on a charter bus, you get free food, you get to travel, you get to meet people from all different schools in Austin, and they're like, for free? They're looking at, so you have to know who your audience is. Everybody's
Yeah.
not driven by that. Some are driven by success, and success for them may just be getting on a team and going out of town for free, or getting all new uniforms and shoes, or whatever it is, but understanding who that student is and what they actually need. I feel like a lot of times in the educational system, we put these kids in a box. And I always use myself as an example. When I got to this school, uh, they said, "Wow, Dr. Hobson, you're always, dressed up, and when did you get your doctorate?" And I said, the degree is for them.
Hmm.
That's a perfect time for me to hold conversations with them. I had one kid, the one I told you that's always in trouble. He said, "Miss, you like a real doctor?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a real doctor." He said, "Well, why are you not working at the hospital?" you know, and so that was my opportunity to say, "Well, you have medical doctors, you have people that have a doctorate in education." So he started learning, like, oh, okay, I understand. And so using ourself, like you said, as the story or as the example, and I don't think we do that enough. That system of just do as I say, not as I do, or whatever,
Mhm.
that does not work with these
Right.
kids. You have
Right.
to find how can I relate to this student? When I had one kid tell me, I can't, I'm not a good reader, so I can't read this stuff. I say, guess what? Me either.
Hmm.
But I learned what works for me. I knew that I couldn't just read a book and understand what it says. I knew I had to read it, highlight it, put a sticky note to remind me what I just read, and I
And
may
quit
have to
note.
go back and read it again. And so that was my how I studied from undergrad all the way through grad school. I knew that I needed more time to understand, what I was reading. And whether it was write a little side note or make a little symbol so I can remember, okay, I remember that paragraph was about creating space or
Right.
creating opportunities. And so if we can teach our students that, that hey, we all don't learn the same. It may take him longer to read, but it's okay. And also giving teachers that patience and the tools to help create those spaces for our students to be successful is very important. And having leaders like you who understand that, I feel, is just as much important in our school system. So I thank you for that.
Yeah. Let me share this. I know time has been spent, and I'm going to share the remainder of my story, and I share this with my students. As a matter of fact, I shared this. I spoke at we have a prison, not a prison. I'm sorry. We have a youth facility that's in our area, and one of our philanthropists um, asked me to come speak to him, and she started crying when I told her the story. But I told you the backdrop about from eighth grade. Well, when I got to high school, of course, I started playing basketball. I didn't play basketball at first, but I started playing basketball. Had a brother that was right over me, so it was just he and I. And so my mom, who was probably around close to 50 at the time, single parent, struggled. She used to always tell us, we had to get a job. We didn't want to get a job. We wanted to play basketball, be a kid. And she was like, I'm telling you, I'm leaving. I'm leaving. And so we thought that, she was playing, just, came home from school one day and she had packed up and left. House was empty. So my brother and I stayed in the house for almost 60 days by ourselves, going through the neighborhood, um, going to the store, you know, stealing to survive. I remember one time we did something we wasn't supposed to do at the school. I'm not gonna say, but just was doing things to survive. And finally, we were by one of my friends. Her mom worked for the Department of Human Resources, so she found out, and she took us in. And so, of course, it was me and my brother. And eventually, we ended up getting a new head basketball coach at Madison that year, Walter Yates. And so Walter Yates ended up taking me in. So he became my foster father, basically. And so, I never thought, going through that, I never thought that I was going to even graduate from high school. I was playing basketball because it was fun. My brother played, I had friends. I didn't even know that I was decent. But through hard work and him talking to me, Mr. Yates talking to me, um, uh, I ended up, becoming a highly touted basketball player coming out of Houston. And so, at the end of my senior year, I had an opportunity to, choose from about 15 schools to go play basketball. And so I ended up going to play basketball at Lamar University here in Beaumont, is where I chose to play ball at. And I graduated, and then I graduated, and I graduated again, and then I just kept going, and I graduated again. And so every opportunity I get, I share that you see the glory, but the story, if you look at the story, you might ask how. You might ask how. And there's some detailed things that I wouldn't, that if when I'm in a smaller setting, I share that I don't share out in the open. But I share those things because the narrative, a story can be written and rewritten. And so my story started off one way, and it was rewritten. And it was rewritten because, I had people, a cadre of people along the way that said, "Hey, listen, you don't need to do this, or you need to change this." And this happened, and then this person was there as a support. And then this happened, and this person was there as a support. But it all started with mindset. I had to make a decision, you know. Um, even in education, when I graduated my first year of teaching, my mother in education, Kathy Faye Chavis, who at the end of my first year, I wanted to quit. I was like, nah, I can't do this. And she was like, no, you can't quit. She said, I see you in your classroom, you do some good things. It's your first year. I was like, nah, I'm quit. And so she was like, okay. And she called me about 2 weeks later. She said, you change your mind, why don't you come work summer school, and I'm gonna give you a small role, and you do that. And so I ended up going back, and I never ever spoke in front of people. Like, I would clam. Like, if at that time, if you all had asked me to speak, I would be like, oh no, I'm not speaking. And I remember one time I did technology on the campus, and we were going to a Mentor Magic conference in Houston. And we were at the Galleria, the Western End, in the Galleria, in one of the ballrooms, and it was probably 1,500 people in the room, and I was just only supposed to be there to do the technology. And so uh, at the end of the presentation, she got everybody to speak, and she was like, "Well, I'm gonna let our technology person speak." And I was like, "Oh no, no!" She looked at me. She said, "You telling me no?" And so, like, my palms were sweaty, my mouth was cotton, and I spoke. And it was the first time that I spoke in front of people. But from that time on, she just put me in position to be, and me as an administrator, I am the administrator that I am because of her. So all along the way, it was just people who invested in me, but it was also me having to make a choice that, hey, listen, I this is some good stuff over here. I know I could be doing that over there, but this is some good stuff over here that they're saying. So let me make up my mind to do this over here, because I know there's going to be better outcomes over here than if I go over here and do this over here. So, building relationships and changing the narrative and experiences is all would change the whole complexion of my life. Uh, and so,
Yeah, and I think the key also to your story and many other stories, I was telling my principal earlier that you have to be consistent.
mhm,
You know, When that kid feels like giving up, be consistent of what you said that you're going to do. Be a person of your word. Be committed. You know, those things are important because a lot of it is a trust issue with a lot of our students. You know, we're not consistent enough, or we don't allow the relationship to build long enough to where it establishes some kind of trust. And so I think that's just so important that the people in your life were consistent with what they thought and believed in you. And sometimes we have to believe for our students. You know, they may not have the strength to believe for themselves, and so that's what we, you know, sometimes have to do. So I appreciate you sharing that story with us, because you don't. We always tell people, "Oh, he's a product of their environment," or "She's a product of your environment," but you still can have control over how your environment ends, or what opportunities your environment may present to you by just changing the narrative or changing your mindset or surrounding yourself around people that truly care about who you are and what you do. So I truly appreciate you sharing that story with us.
Yes, indeed. Just as I mentioned earlier, you are an example of what we need so many administrators to become, to understand, to know that it's a necessity to look at these kids completely different. And just titling this episode what I titled it is just simply because it's true.
Mhm.
Like enhanced relationships, they enhance achievement
Mhm.
because there's more sense of he actually does care.
Mhm.
And what I'll do is just to kind of to wrap us up, I'll share a piece of my story. I was, yeah, when I went to speak to that principal that one day, I spoke at the alternative school that same day. And there was a young man that I had a conversation with, and I didn't know who he was at the time. And ended up, he's actually the grandson of one of my great aunts. So
Mhm.
he's there in alternative school. We figured that out. So he started to open up to me a little bit more. I took him home after school and I had a conversation with his grandmother. She was excited to see me because I hadn't visited her in a while. His older cousin was there, which I played high school football with him, football and baseball. Anyways, I poured into this young man. This was 2016. I poured into him. About 3 years later, I get this random message on Facebook Messenger. And I wish I could pull it up really quickly, but it went something like this. Hey, Mr. Street, I don't know if you remember me. This is Jason. You came to talk to me at the intermediate school or at the alternative school, and I just wanted to thank you because now I got my own house, I got my own car, I'm married, and I got a kid on the way, and my life don't look nothing like it did when you met me. And I want to thank you because you were one of the very few that actually took the time to talk to me instead of just cast me off as the bad kid. And man, it put tears in my eyes because I knew I had a little piece, at least a little piece of changing the trajectory in his life. But far too many people in the educational space, they don't take that time.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons why Dr. Hobson and I put together HSBA, because we want to be part of that story of changing these individuals' trajectories and connect ourselves with individuals like yourself to make that possible. So I just kind of wanted to share that and let it be known that we make so much more of a profound impact than we ever realize, but you have to give of yourself. You have
Mhm.
to be willing to go out and be that difference instead of saying, okay, go over there, they'll take care of you.
Mhm.
So
You know,
definitely.
cognitive development is purposed in education, but I think social development is the piece that's missing that contributes to the cognitive development. And until we understand that, we have to move beyond that. I got to get this. Uh, I have to get this math in. I got to get these problems on this board. That there has to be a connection, so that I can get that to you. And how we do that, it looks different for everybody. Nobody's going to interact with a kid the same way, um, and so, you know, we have to do what we have to do that's comfortable for us to be able to strengthen the relationship between ourselves and kids. because at the end of the day, and I share this with my teachers all the time, um, the state of Texas has said that you have a responsibility to educate the kids. They have a right to a free and appropriate education. And if you don't do those things outside of the pedagogy, which is the things that you learn in college, so say, if you don't operate outside of the pedagogy to support students, you're not going to have much success. And it's evident in when you go to the conferences and you have somebody present and they say, as one of the warm ups that they do, they ask, name who your favorite teacher is, and then you name your favorite teacher, and then you start asking. They ask you, why did you name that particular person? And in most cases, everything, all of the attributes, has to do with the relationship, how they felt about them, how they encouraged them, how they pushed them, and all of those things are relative to the relationship that they had, with that person. And so, if we don't attack the fact and the notion that relationships have to be strong in order for us to support our students and to allow them to develop optimally, then we're gonna continue to fail our kids, and they're our kids because they look like us. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that we're doing what we need to do for our kids. And it starts with building relationships, creating the experiences with them, and changing the narrative.
Wow. Thank you. I mean, just ending on that note, I feel like it's very important because we always end with, what could you tell those educators who are out there? But what would be your advice if you can say that one thing to that administrator who is trying to implement change? If you can say something to that person, what would it be? And also that educator and that student. So I want you to say three things. Um, Speak to that, say that one thing to that educator, that one thing to that teacher, and to that student has that similar story or look like you.
Okay, what I would say to the educator or teacher, I guess, would be, to the teacher, I would say, look at the student, don't look through them. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes we look past the student or through the student, and we don't stop and look at the student to see really what's going on. And in order for us to support a student, we have to know what's going on. So we have to stop and look at the student. For the student, I would say that failure is not fatal. It only becomes fatal if you change to do what you did in order to fail. So you have to change the narrative. And then for the educator, I would say that we have to have a different consciousness about our responsibility to our students. And once we have a different consciousness, then we have to change our actions and behaviors. And once we do that, we'll be able to support the whole child. So
Wow. Well, thank you for that. And it is such a pleasure to have men of color in these leadership roles because as me and Brian, we always, we do a lot of research, a lot of things that you have as well. There's not enough of us in those spaces that still live their truth, and so I appreciate you reminding your students and sharing your story with your students so they can see themselves through you. And so we thank you for being you and being truthful because you're doing it very well. And it's definitely a blessing that we're connected with you on the Black Podcast. And there's so many things that we have to offer and services that we would like to present to you as well. In changing that narrative because as we know it takes a village to raise these kids, and so we appreciate your leadership, your openness, your vulnerability, your consistency in making sure that you are the change and not trying to make the change. So thank you for that.
well, I thank you all for inviting me. I'm passionate about my kids, our kids, and so I'm passionate about what I do. And I say all the time, if I could go back 28 years and do things over, I still would be an educator. Even though we don't make a whole lot of money, I still would be an educator because I think that the we get paid, But what you talked about, how the kid brought tears to your eyes, that's the kind of pay that's worth more than
Priceless.
$1 million. Yeah, it's priceless. So yeah, so I appreciate the invite.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So it has been another great one. We'll put you backstage real quick, close out, then we'll come back to you and wrap things up with you. Thank you so much for the work that you do and the blessings that you have bestowed upon us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Sir. All right, you're muted.
It's
There
good
we
to see
go.
we have some leaders out there who are still, constantly conscious about making that change. Because I think that what we found is that people are very iffy about speaking on certain topics or their story, with the fear of someone judging them, or thinking maybe they're not fit to be a leader. But as he mentioned, him sharing his story gives other kids hope, give other teachers inspiration, and know that if he can make it, you can make it. I mean, just imagine coming into your house, things that we take for granted, coming home and nobody's there, your mother is gone, but still having people in your life that were very consistent with you and showed you love and built those relevant relationships, help him to now be a doctorate and a principal and inspiring a superintendent. And so we need more people like that in our educational system to help create that space for our students and change the narrative, especially for our young Black males. So I truly appreciated him.
Yes, indeed. We'll definitely be continuing to bring similar guests before you because we really want to bring this type of content, this type of conversation to really empower our youth, our educators, our parents to understand that, you know what, we got you, but you have to be willing to reach out for the support. You have to be willing to really connect, just really connect with those resources and take full advantage.
Yeah.
So, off of that note, we will be back same place, same time next week, September the 2nd. And we definitely look forward to you guys becoming and being a part of the show with us. Make sure you share out this content. If you have any type of individual in the academic space, make sure you share this information with them because so many need the knowledge that was dropped today.
And you can find us at We Are HSBA, wearehsba.com, and you will find out more information on how you can book us to come to your campuses, whether it's high school, college, or if it's a private school, academy. We travel, we have virtual classes and resources as well. So please make sure you reach out to us and look for our webinar that we have coming up. It is so important. So even if you're not in education and you have people that are, please make sure you share those flyers and that content because this is stuff that is relevant and we know that our students need it. So we need your support. So thank you again for tuning in on the Black Podcast. We will see you next Thursday here at 4 p.m. Central Time. We love you and thank you for all your support.